So one of the reasons that Stadia has been struggling is because of a lack of promise features, and among the things that they really drove forward in their marketing campaign is that Stadia would be a 4K gaming platform. And so you can see right here in the GDC 2019 press conference, they're going all out talking about up to 4K 60 FPS, 4K 60 FPS. Right here, you can see them talking about the future of an 8K 120 FPS gaming experience, which is laughable looking back at that now, given that Stadia struggles to play certain games at the same standards as last gen's Xbox One X, which I'll get to in a bit. And then right here we got Stadia spotlighting how the hardware capabilities are stronger than PS4 Pro and Xbox One X with 10.7 teraflops, which is more than both Xbox One X 6.0 and PS4 Pro's 4.2 combined. And so the promise was that we would see some of the best graphical fidelity and performance through Stadia. Beyond that, Phil Harrison, vice president and GM of Stadia, straight up just said that he guarantees that launch titles will fully support 4K. One user asked him, will all games on Stadia run at 4K 60 FPS? Be good to get some clarity. Phil Harrison responded with, yes, all games at launch support 4K. We designed Stadia to enable 4K 60 FPS with appropriate TV and bandwidth. We want all games to play 4K 60, but sometimes for artistic reasons, a game is 4K 30, so Stadia always streams at 4K 60 via 2x encode. But soon after Stadia's launch, we started to see that promise crumbling. So for example, Red Dead Redemption 2 was promised to run at 4K 60 FPS. Here's the tweet in question that reads, don't have a PC capable of running the highest settings? With Stadia, you don't need to. Play Red Dead Redemption 2 on Stadia to see every glorious detail in 4K 60 FPS. Now, if you try to go to that tweet now, you'll see that it is deleted. Why, you may ask? Because it turns out that was a lie. Red Dead Redemption 2, when it finally launched on Stadia, rendered at a max of 1440p, which is less than what even PS4 Pro can render. This is a console that has less than half the teraflops of Stadia's hardware capabilities. And the disparity is even worse with Xbox One X, which runs the game at full 4K 30 FPS. So that wasn't a good sign. It also turns out Destiny 2 rendered at native 1080p, upscaled to 4K, but never truly reaches 4K, which a lot of people were surprised about. Given that disparity in teraflops, a lot of people assumed Destiny 2 could easily run at 4K 60 or be optimized to run at that resolution and frame rate, but that didn't turn out to be the case. And then we have Doom Eternal. During the GDC 2019 press conference, it was one of the first games that was really highlighted, and it was said on stage that the game would run at true 4K 60 frames per second. And then it was announced that the game would actually on Stadia run up to an upsampled 2160p from 1800p 60 FPS, so 1800p is the true resolution. So all of this paints a very clear picture. Google significantly exaggerated the hardware capabilities of Stadia. It cannot run a lot of games at 4K, and developers seem to be having trouble taking full advantage of those 10.7 teraflops, given that there are games on the weaker PS4 Pro and Xbox One X that straight up run better than the far more powerful Stadia. And at launch, a lot of games did not run at true 4K, only upscaled 4K. And when people found out about this, obviously they weren't happy at the misleading marketing or the exaggerated marketing. And there is a group of people who are seeking a class action lawsuit against Google Stadia, according to this article published 2 days ago on February 18th, 2021 via news outlet 9to5 Google. So this is what the article details. A lawsuit originally filed in New York in October of 2020 has recently been surfaced by classaction.org. So this class action lawsuit was filed about 4 months ago, and since Since then, I guess there haven't been any updates, so hard to say where this case is going, but it still seems to be ongoing. The case alleges that Google greatly exaggerated the streaming quality and display resolution, yeah, they did, in order to juice subscription numbers for Stadia ahead of the platform's launch. Indeed, if everything went well with Stadia with that kind of hardware capability, it seemed to many as though Stadia was kind of kickstarting next-generation graphics and performance, but they could barely achieve even what PS4 Pro and Xbox One X could achieve. It's especially detrimental for Stadia because this is a cloud streaming gaming platform, and that means that high resolution will compensate for some of the artifacting and the lower quality image that comes with streaming, but with many games unable to achieve 4K, the visual fidelity at 1080p, 1440p, it's just not as ideal as local hardware gaming, and so that high resolution is important to make up for that. Now, it is cited by 9to5Google that at this point, roughly half of Stadia's library can run at up to 4K 60 FPS, with many others offering 4K 30, but for a lot of the major AAA graphically intensive titles that many expected would run at that frame rate and resolution, just doesn't run as it was originally promised. It very quickly became clear that Stadia doesn't seem to be as powerful as originally touted, or at the very least, it has those teraflops, but developers clearly are having trouble utilizing all that power, and I'm not sure about the technicalities behind that, but something's just not right if Xbox One X can run games better than Stadia. Making matters worse is Google's lack of transparency to customers when it comes to resolution and frame rate of games that people might look up on the store. So for example, right here, if you look at Doom Eternal, you scroll down, you'll find here information about the game, but nothing about resolution or frame rate. You just don't know until either developers disclose that information or until some news outlet analyzes the footage. So 9to5Google aptly highlights that Google still does not offer clear information on the resolution of a game purchased on Stadia before the point of purchase. Now, it isn't uncommon for other digital storefronts to not offer information about resolution and frame rate on a video game's listing, but that information is especially relevant for Stadia, given that, again, because it is cloud streaming, image quality will be more affected by resolution and frame rate than other platforms where you play games locally. But more importantly, you are paying for 4K with Stadia. There's a subscription, Stadia Pro, that allows you to stream up to 4K. If you only have the free subscription, you cap out at 1080p. You can see right here, one of the selling points of Stadia Pro is up to 4K HDR with 5.1 surround sound. And so for customers to determine if they're getting their money's worth out of essentially paying monthly for 4K, they need to know what games run 4K, which games don't. And that way they can make a more informed decision on certain purchases. But what Stadia is doing instead is not only not offering that information on the store page, but also issuing flat-out lies from time to time about certain games' ability to actually run true 4K 60 FPS. And so with all that in mind, this lawsuit, if it goes through, if it ends up going anywhere, seeks damages for anyone who purchased a Stadia Founders Edition Premier Edition or paid for a Stadia Pro subscription based on the information that Stadia would support all games in 4K. As for what I think the chances are of this class action lawsuit being successful, it's hard to say, because on one hand, Google has technically been using the term up to 4K, and beyond that, Stadia does technically stream at 4K. It's just that it upscales lower resolutions, but that's still not technically true 4K, which is what many people assumed, and there is evidence of people at Google on an executive level just flat out stating very explicitly that all games at launch support 4K. And then when you look at what happened with Red Dead Redemption 2 and Doom here, it's very clear that this was miscommunication and mismanagement that led to a lot of consumers feeling like they were taken for a ride, like they were duped. It also doesn't help that Stadia just flat out seems to have a pattern of mismanagement and poor leadership and miscommunication and a lack of transparency. This especially shows in the report by Kotaku here, this investigative report that highlights Stadia's first-party studio shutdowns and the piss-poor handling of that, where developers were told they were making great progress, and they were told that they were going to discuss plans for the future a week before they were laid off, a week before those studio shutdowns happened, and these developers were not warned about any of that. Making matters worse, Phil Harrison knew that the shutdowns were happening when the week prior to the shutdowns, he sent out this email talking about what great progress the teams were making, talking about how they'll confirm the SG&E investment envelope shortly, which will in turn inform the SG&E strategy and 2021 objectives and key results, making it seem as though there's a long-term future for these studios, basically misleading the developers into a false sense of security before dropping very cruelly this bombshell on them. The bombshell that they put all of this time and effort into basically nothing, as Google Stadia just decided they weren't able to commit to a studio's first-party development endeavors just like a year and a half after their establishment. When you hear about how badly Stadia bullshits their own employees and developers, it doesn't surprise me that Stadia has taken to bullshitting a lot of customers about Stadia's capabilities and exaggerating its features, or just straight up not shipping Stadia properly with promised features. So given all that, I cannot say that I'm particularly rooting for Stadia, or at least the way that whole endeavor is being managed right now, the way communication's happening, the way marketing's happening, some of the crap that's going on behind the scenes with how developers are being treated. But legalities are a whole different story, and I don't know how safe Google is from this class action lawsuit, but I suppose time will tell. In my eyes, though, Google very clearly did lie a number of times or exaggerate a number of times. The only major disparity where Stadia came out on top that we saw was Cyberpunk 2077. Stadia does run it better than the Xbox One and PS4 versions, but with PS5 and Series X now out and vastly outperforming PS4 and Xbox One X, and with Stadia sometimes not being able to keep up with the last-gen consoles, it feels even more irrelevant, because that power disparity is no longer there. In fact, Series X has more teraflops technically than Stadia does, and PS5 is about the same as Stadia. So that's an advantage that they no longer really have. And beyond that, PS5 and Series X have a lot of exciting things going on for them in terms of some of the services that they're offering, and more importantly, the games that they're launching. Stadia, on the other hand, with the studio shutdowns, no longer has any unique first-party exclusives in development for their platform, which is one reason less to be interested in Stadia, to play games on Stadia versus all of these other platforms that seem to have a richer long-term future. So just all around, the situation surrounding Stadia seems grim, and I personally hope that this class action lawsuit does go somewhere, as Google needs to be held accountable for the bullshit that they spout, for the exaggerated marketing. Any game company that engages in exaggerated marketing, I think, needs some accountability so that they, stop with that nonsense, because it can be infuriating for customers. But that's just one man's take on everything. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the ongoing class action lawsuit and the direction you think that'll take, and what your thoughts are on Stadia's communication regarding 4K 60 FPS, its capabilities, and just all the marketing surrounding that. Drop a comment, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.